Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. In today's video, we're going to talk about magical electional opportunities that are going to be available to us from the Virgo Full Moon on March 9th until the Aries New Moon on March 24th. So, of course, because we're going from a full moon to a new moon, we're of course dealing with the waning moon phase. And when we're dealing with waning moon phases, especially when we're talking about, say, Lunar Mansion talismans, we're focused primarily on giving back, on releasing, and on letting go. Unfortunately, we're not going to have any Lunar Mansion talismanic opportunities during this 2-week period just because the mansions where the moon will be passing through aren't really conducive to more positive manifestations of waning moon energy. So, typically with waning moons, you want to release things that are no longer serving you or just kind of get away from things that you don't want to be a part of anymore. And while a lot of the mansions have more like waning applications or ways to utilize them, they're not always super easy to kind of spin positively. A lot of the more waning aspected lunar mansions, we'll say, are much more kind of destructive and kind of more heavy-handed than we would typically like to partake in or utilize. So when it comes to those mansions that are more difficult or more inherently destructive, I tend to try to skip over them just because they're not very conducive to more positive, more growth-oriented ends. So because of that, we only have 3 charts that we're going to talk about today. 2 of those are talismanic opportunities, and then 1 is not necessarily an opportunity for a talisman, but is a chart that kind of has a specific thing in it that I want to kind of talk about and show. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. That first chart that I wanted to talk about is here on the screen, and this is what would kind of more normally be, or in a little bit of a better world, be a Algorab fixed star talisman. Now, Algorab is a star in the constellation of the Raven, but when we project that star onto the ecliptic, it falls within about 13 degrees of Libra in the tropical zodiac. So when we're doing talismans for fixed stars, we want to make sure that the fixed star or the degree of the fixed star when it's projected onto the ecliptic falls on either the midheaven or the ascendant. And so in this instance, we have 13 degrees Libra on the ascendant. So that's fine. We got that working out for us. And then we want the moon to be applying a conjunction to that degree kind of as closely as possible without going over. And we have that here with the moon at 9 degrees Libra moving forward to the 13 degree mark. But at the same time, while that's happening, we want the moon to also be applying an aspect to a star that's of the nature of Algorab. And Algorab is a star that's of the nature of Saturn and Mars. And so while the moon is not applying immediately an aspect to Saturn, we do have the application to the square of Mars in Capricorn. So I wanted to talk about this election on Algorab fixed star specifically for 2 reasons. The first reason is because one of the powers that Algorab has is that it's used to prevent illnesses. It's a very proactive, very preventative kind of personality. And so, thinking about world news right now, everybody's concerned about disease, about being sick suddenly. And while I do believe that talismanic magic and astrological magic specifically are very helpful tools in, remaining healthy and countering illnesses and trying to prevent yourself from catching an illness when coupled, obviously, with World Health Organization and CDC recommendations for prevention and hygiene, I wouldn't recommend this one. And I say that because I think it's very important to be very critical of the elections that you're utilizing. And if you happen to choose to go online and purchase a health aspected talisman, to be very concerned and very scrutinizing over those elections. So I say that, and that's a real thing. You want to make sure that your elections are top-notch, especially when they're involved with health and the human body, just because of all the things that can kind of go wrong. But also, it's a good example of how we have to treat malefic planets differently based on the goal of the work that we're trying to accomplish. So in this chart, like I said, we want the moon to be applying an aspect to a planet that's of the nature of the star. So with Algorab, Saturn, and Mars, we have the Mars square, and you're thinking, oh, great, perfect. That's what we want. And while in some instances I wouldn't be very hesitant to move forward with this, with an election like this, because we're dealing with health, because we're dealing with infectious disease, and anything like that kind of currently going on, I would be much more careful about Mars squares or about Saturn squares. And so we have to treat malefic planets a little bit differently because they're not sort of naturally inclined to heal or to help and to protect like that. That's not really what they want to do. We can kind of sweet talk them into it, or, kind of talk them into doing it in a way that they want to do it and it makes them do it better. But that's just not really what they want to do. So when it comes with the malefic planets Saturn and Mars, you typically want to avoid the more harsh aspects, the opposition, the square, and even sometimes the conjunction, depending. Whereas with benefic planets, Venus and Jupiter, the square is not a big deal, and the opposition is not ideal, but it's not a deal breaker just because they're more conducive towards health and more gentle. So if you were in a situation where you needed a health talisman a bit more, like an emergency or more expedited, and you had a recent or upcoming a talismanic opportunity which featured the moon, in a square with Venus or anything like that, that's not as big of a deal as squares with Mars or squares with Saturn, which you typically want to avoid unless you have some kind of like big mitigating factor on top of it, like reception or something like that, which makes that square less tense or less difficult or less damaging. So especially in this instance, not only do you have the moon applying the square of Mars, which is an impediment to the moon, but also you would have to take into consideration that Mars is square the ascendant at the same time. And so especially with the moon and the ascendant being significators of the body and general health, Mars squares and things like that aren't going to work out. So we're going to have to kind of take a pass on Algorab right now. We're not going to be able to use this fixed star right now for any sort of prevention or kind of health preservation. That's not something we're going to be able to do, but hopefully once Mars moves into Aquarius, we'll have much more opportunity to take advantage of this star. Then we'll be dealing with, the trine, much more healthy, much easier to utilize. All right, so the second election that I wanted to talk about, and really our first talismanic opportunity election, is going to be on March 12th, kind of closer to midnight, 11:13 p.m. in my time, and you're going to want to have 12 degrees Scorpio rising or thereabouts. And this election is for a fixed star talisman of the star Alphecca in the Northern Crown, the jewel of the crown. And here, looking at the election, like I said before, you want to have the degree associated with that star. In this case, Alphecca is 12 degrees Scorpio on the ascendant or midheaven. We have that on the ascendant. You want the moon applying to that degree as closely as you can without going over. Here, the moon is at 10 degrees Scorpio, applying to that star in 12 degrees Scorpio. So you have that working for us. And then finally, you want the moon to apply to a planet that is of the nature of that star. And Alphecca is a star of the nature of Venus and Mars. And so here we kind of have that Mars aspect again repeated. Now the moon is applying a sextile to Mars through a much friendlier aspect. So this is, an easier chart, an easier Mars connection to have. Not only do we have it facilitated through a sextile aspect, one that's more friendly, but also through reception. Mars receives the moon into his domicile of Scorpio, takes better care of her, that kind of thing. So a much better framework or a much better chart to make a talisman out of than our previous one, which featured the Mars square. A bit too harsh, especially for health or body-based work that we want to be more pleasant, more easy, more supportive than kind of generally, or maybe we have more reason to be more specific and more scrutinizing in body and health aspected stuff, whereas in other fields we may feel more compelled to take more risk, which is totally fine. But for body and health, we want low risk, high reward as much as possible. So Alphecca is the jewel in the Northern Crown constellation, and Hermes tells us that Alphecca talismans are used, kind of quote, to give men grace, which is, very nice, obviously a reference to the Venus nature aspect of the star, but also sort of to get goodwill from authority figures or to sort of get preference from authority figures. So then obviously that's kind of the crown image that's involved there with the authority. So Alphecca talismans can be used to get somebody who is already kind of high up in a field to notice you and to kind of get preferment through that relationship to help kind of establish networking is a good way to utilize Alphecca. And to kind of take advantage of opportunities that those networking and those positive relationships can have for your, for career or hobbies or kind of anything that you want to move forward in or be more well known for. So this can be especially useful for individuals who are seeking, say, like mentorship. Alphecca can also be utilized to make your work more well known, like make it fall kind of into the lap of the right person or, kind of within the eyesight of the right person who can then share that with other people, get your stuff kind of out there more, like being retweeted by a big Twitter account kind of thing. That can be another positive use of Alphecca. Of course, it can be used more traditionally for seeking promotions, getting your boss to like you, kind of establishing or repairing that kind of relationship if there's been some kind of tiff or, you and your boss no longer get along. So the sort of more traditional or more typical application of an Alphecca talisman is going to be for career advancement, for promotion. So if that's something that you're, in the running for, or you feel like you would like to take a step up with, then definitely an Alphecca talisman can help you to be the preferred candidate in whatever sort of job you're vying for. So definitely consider that if that's something that you are kind of looking forward to in the near future or would like to accomplish, Alpheka can really help you with that. I also think that Alpheka can be very useful for individuals who are in kind of like high stress environments or like performing arts or public relations or anything like that, just because of Alpheka's emphasis on grace and kind of harmony and being able to bridge those divides and kind of the grace under fire aspect that we kind of see a lot in those kind of high pressure situations. So the third chart we're going to talk about today and our second talismanic opportunity is going to be on March 22nd in the morning, and it's going to be a chart for a Venus in Taurus talisman. So Venus was in Pisces in square Mars the whole time, and we were all very sad because we wouldn't be able to get a Venus talisman during that time, and I hoped and prayed that we would be able to get something out of Venus in Taurus, and so this is kind of our first opportunity of that. And here we are, of course, focused on Venus in Taurus in the ascendant. It's what we want, that planet to be in a sign that it does well in, and angular. Then we also want the moon to be immediately applying an aspect to Venus, and here we have Venus applying, and here we have the moon applying to Venus from Pisces, her exaltation, which is very good, and it's even currently the hour of Venus at this time. It's a Sunday, and Venus's hour. And in this electional chart, there's about a good 30-minute window between when Venus gets angular enough to be utilized and when we have the commencement of the Mercury hour after the Venus hour finishes. So there's a good amount of time to get something done and create a talisman for this election. So that's kind of our setup there. Venus is well dignified. Neither Venus nor the moon are afflicted by the malefic planets Mars and Saturn here. But of course, as you can see, our trade-off here, I guess, is that Mars and Saturn are conjoined the midheaven degree, so they're also very emphasized in this chart in some way. So that might be something that to take into consideration for those who have more, reservation towards it or don't necessarily play well with the malefic planets. They're both very well dignified, which is really great since they're going to be acting more like accidental benefics just because of their enhanced dignity during this time, but still kind of something to take consideration that this Mars and Saturn square is going to be kind of amplified in this talisman at the same time just because of their relationship with Venus. And by that I mean like being in the signs of Aquarius and Capricorn, where they're kind of going to be in that 10th or 9th house position a lot of times in relation to Venus and Taurus. So that's what I mean, because they're not in a square or in a bad aspect with Venus at this time, but they're still going to kind of be occupying that 10th sign-ish, 10th house-ish position in relation to Venus. So something that we're going to take into consideration with this chart. But saying that and kind of drawing on this relationship between Saturn, Mars, and Venus, you can actually kind of consciously call upon that in the election itself, because as you can see, Venus is moving towards the trine of Mars, which is very helpful. They're both in signs that they're strong in, that they're powerful in, and Mars rules the 7th house in the election chart. So this could be a really great opportunity to utilize a Venus talisman for those things that she already is well known for, relationships, romance, those kinds of things, because of that 7th house, the first 7th house Lord connection, or just kind of generally more social aspects of it, because the 7th house tends to represent other people. So if there's like a relationship with another person you're trying to repair, or you just want to kind of do better or perform better without social anxiety or anything like that, this can be a really great talisman for that, especially with the moon placed in the 11th house. Just a really great opportunity to kind of ease those situations that many people find to be kind of stressful, to meet new people, to get out there, that kind of thing. This can be a really great opportunity for that. But keep in mind that Saturn Mars is going to be a factor, so you can either pull it in intentionally by making kind of the Mars as the Lord of the 7th house important, or can try to ignore it to an extent and see how else it manifests with the talisman, which might not be, a great thing to just kind of roll the dice on. All right, so those were the 3 charts that I wanted to talk about, the Alpheka and the Venus talisman. We have kind of a focus on social relationships in this 2-week period because of the, Alpheka being a Venus aspected star. And of course, Venus being, that's what she does, is relationships and social kind of networking, I guess we could say. But whereas Venus is more about personal relationships and strengthening them, Alpheka is a bit more about maneuvering relationships or capitalizing on them almost to get something that we want out of that, like to see what we can get out of a relationship or what we can be given through the other person in it, which of course can be a little manipulative, so you want to be careful with that. But at the same time, on the other hand, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And Alpheka can really help you make those connections to get further in whatever kind of field that you're wanting to develop in. And of course, that Algorab election that I showed at the beginning, which I really don't recommend utilizing for a health talisman just because of the more difficult Mars setups. Hopefully, as the moon goes into the waxing phase after the new moon, we'll have more opportunities to look into and have better, more appropriate health-based talismans focused on prevention and immune stimulants for anybody who is personally concerned about, our current coronavirus scare, or maybe has loved ones that are in those more vulnerable demographics. Hopefully, we'll be able to have something to kind of help out a little bit more, but nothing is going to replace the kind of general guidelines for hygiene and health practices. So be sure to keep those in mind, and everybody stay safe and healthy and well, and I'll see everybody again on the Aries new moon.